Hello, my friend. I'm truly glad to meet you again on tonight's journey. Before we begin, let your shoulders relax. Take a slow, gentle breath and allow all the noise of the day to slowly fade into the distance. And if you'd like, leave a small comment and tell me where are you listening from tonight and what time is it where you are. Tonight we are going to return to a very different planet, not the familiar Earth of roads, rooftops, electric lights, and the distant sound of traffic outside. But an Earth hundreds of millions of years older, where the air was sometimes heavier. Swamp forests rose high through damp mist. The ground trembled beneath the footsteps of giant creatures, and the deep sea concealed shadows so vast that even imagination seems to pause before them. Our question is very simple, but the deeper we go, the stranger it becomes. Why did Earth once have giant creatures? Why were there insects as large as birds, dinosaurs longer than a house, marine reptiles swimming through ancient oceans, mammoths walking through ice and snow, and creatures that seem as though they belonged only to legend? Let us move slowly. Let us see this planet as a vast book of stone. And layer by layer, fossil by fossil, silent skeleton by silent skeleton, it will begin to tell us the story of the age of giants. Imagine tonight, as the world around you slowly grows quiet, that a very old door is opening in the darkness. Not the door of a room, a house, or a familiar city, but a door leading backward into an Earth so ancient that no trace of humanity had ever existed. No voices, no firelight, no forest path worn by human feet. Only wind vapor mud, ancient canopies, and a planet breathing with the slow rhythm of time. You step through that door, and the ground beneath your feet is no longer the ground of the present. It is softer, wetter, darker, as though the entire world has just been born from water and mist. In the distance, strange forests rise through the dim light, unlike any forest we know today. There are no familiar birds calling overhead, no bright flowers along the path, only strange trunks standing still in air heavy with moisture swamps spreading out like black mirrors, and now and then some great movement making the surface of the water tremble. In that place, you begin to feel something strange. Earth once had different scales. Not only taller mountains, denser forests, or wilder oceans. Life itself once entered forms so large that today we almost have to pause before believing they were real. There were creatures that once crawled through mud like long shadows in the mist. There were bodies that once moved through deep forests with a weight that made the ground sink beneath every step. There were shadows that once passed through ancient seas and ancient skies, leaving behind in stone the silent traces of an age that does not belong to human memory. And within that landscape, our question begins to appear very slowly. Why did Earth once create giant creatures like these? Why were there periods when this planet seemed to stretch the limits of life, allowing bodies to become larger, heavier, slower, yet also stronger and more fragile? To answer that question, we must go deep into the breath of the atmosphere, into the warming and cooling of the climate, into ancient forests, food-rich oceans, and into the quiet way evolution built each body across millions of years. If you could stand on the ground at that time, the first thing you might feel would be the heavy dampness of the air. Vapor hangs suspended among the trees. The ground is soft and dark, covered with mud. Fallen leaves, collapsed trunks, and layers of plant matter slowly decaying. Ancient forests did not resemble the forests of today. They had no familiar birdsong high in the branches, no flowers blooming brightly like those in a spring garden. Instead, there were strange trunks, tower-like trees, great fern-like growths, and swamps spreading through the mist. The whole world seemed to breathe with a slow, deep, heavy rhythm. In that setting, gigantism begins to make sense. A large creature is not simply a smaller creature enlarged. It is an entirely different way of living. A large body can retain heat better. It can travel farther. It can reach more sources of food. It can make predators hesitate, or it can become the predator that other creatures must avoid. When a body grows large enough, it no longer merely exists within its environment. It begins to shape the environment around it. Each step can press the ground downward. Each feeding can change a patch of vegetation. Each footprint left in mud can, under rare and fortunate conditions, become a fossilized line of writing sent into the future. But gigantism has never been a free gift. The larger a creature is, the more energy it needs. It must find enough food to sustain its entire body. It must have a skeleton strong enough to bear its weight, a respiratory system efficient enough to carry air into its tissues, and a circulatory system stable enough to keep the body alive. If it grows slowly, it needs many years of survival before it can reproduce. If the environment changes too quickly, a giant body may not be able to adapt in time. For that reason, large size is always a trade-off. It can be power in a stable world, but it can also become a burden when that world begins to fracture. This is important because it helps us avoid an overly simple understanding. Ancient Earth did not have giant creatures simply because everything was bigger back then. In reality, that is not true. In every age beside giant bodies, there have always been countless small creatures, quiet, flexible, and enduring. Many small species survived upheavals that larger species could not pass through. Life has never moved in only one direction. It does not always want to become larger. It simply tries every possible path. When conditions are suitable, some branches of life step onto the path of gigantism. When conditions are no longer suitable, that path closes. So, our story is not a story about monsters in the frightening sense. It is a story about conditions. What kind of planet must exist to allow large bodies to appear? What must the air be like? How abundant must the food be? How long must the environment remain stable? What pressures must predator and prey create for one another? And how must the body of that creature be built so that it is not defeated by its own size? Seen in that way, a giant skeleton is no longer only an overwhelming image. It becomes evidence of a very special moment when many conditions on Earth came together and opened a rare doorway for life. Think of this planet as an enormous room whose shape is always changing. At times that room was warmer, at times wetter. At times the atmosphere contained elements more favorable to certain kinds of bodies. At times forests spread widely, seas rose plains, opened, food became abundant, enemies were fewer, or ecological gaps appeared after a major upheaval. During such periods, life had the opportunity to try new sizes. Not because it had a clear purpose, but because evolution always works through variation selection and time. Bodies that fit the world around them were kept longer. Bodies that no longer fit slowly disappeared. Here we begin to see that gigantism was not some strange accident. It was a result with logic behind it. If a plant-eating creature lived in an area with abundant food, a larger body could help it digest longer travel farther and face fewer attacks once fully grown. If a predator lived in an environment with large prey, a larger size could help it bring down targets, smaller species could not reach. If a creature lived underwater, where buoyancy supported much of its weight, the body could grow in ways that would be difficult on land. If a group of creatures had the right respiratory system, bones, reproductive strategy, or feeding method, they could go farther along that path than other groups. But at the beginning of this journey, what we need to hold on to is not yet a list of specific names, not yet which creature was how many meters long, how many tons in weight, or which period it lived in. What matters more is the feeling of another Earth, an Earth capable of creating conditions that today we see only through stone, bone, and traces. Fossils do not merely tell us that an animal once lived. They tell us that an entire world was once suitable enough for it to live. A large bone cannot exist alone in the past. Behind it, there must have been food, climate shelter, breeding seasons, young enemies, disease accidents, competition, and countless ordinary days that pass before death turn that body into part of the ground. That makes natural history feel more intimate. If we look at giant skeletons only as exhibits, they can seem distant, cold, almost as if they do not belong to our world. But if we imagine them alive, everything begins to change. A large creature also had to wake in the dim light of an ancient morning. It also had to search for food. It also had to avoid danger when it was young. It also had to pass through droughts, floods, shifts in climate, and landscapes that were no longer the same as yesterday. However giant it may have been, it was still a living body, dependent on the planet around it every moment. Perhaps that is what makes this question so compelling. When we ask why Earth once had giant creatures, we are really asking what kind of place Earth once was. We are asking why the sky, the ground, and the oceans once allowed such sizes to exist. We are asking why there were periods when this planet seemed like a stage too vast, where life could step forward in forms bolder, heavier, slower, yet also more magnificent and more fragile. And we are also asking why that stage eventually changed, causing many creatures that once ruled it to disappear, leaving behind an emptiness that only imagination and science can begin to fill. Return to the image from the beginning. You are standing beneath the skeleton in the museum in the dim light. But this time, it is no longer a dead object. In your mind, those bones begin to be covered once more with muscle, skin, breath, and motion. The neck is no longer still. It stretches through the canopy. The tail is no longer a chain of bones. It sweeps across the ground. The feet are no longer standing on a tiled floor. They are pressing into mud, leaving deep impressions beneath the weight of a body that once belonged to another world. And somewhere very far away in time, ancient Earth is still breathing around it. On this journey, we will not search for a single answer, because there is no single answer. We cannot say it was all because of oxygen. We cannot say it was all because of food. Nor can we say it was all because dinosaurs had special bodies, or because the ocean supported large creatures. Each giant group has its own story. Each era has its own conditions. But between these stories, there is still one common thread. Gigantism appears when planet body and time allow it. It is the result of a rare meeting between opportunity and limitation. And perhaps that meeting itself is the true wonder. Not merely the fact that an animal could weigh tens of tons, or that a wing could stretch wide like the shadow of a boat across the sky, or that a footprint could outlast every city humanity has ever built. The wonder is that Earth many times created the conditions for life to go that far. Across hundreds of millions of years, this planet experimented with sizes, forms, and ways of existing, as though each age were a very long biological dream. Some of those dreams ended. Some left behind smaller descendants. Some remain only as fossils buried deep in stone. But all of them tell us that the living world has never been simple. As you enter this story, there is no need to hurry. Let each image rise slowly. A forest with no human voice, a mist-covered swamp, an ancient sky heavy with vapor, a ground that had never known the footprint of humankind, but had already known the weight of the creatures we now call giants. It all begins with a very different planet where air, water, trees, mud, and time were quietly preparing one of the greatest questions in natural history. And as we go deeper into that earth, the first secret will not lie in a sharp tooth, a clawed limb, or a skeleton so long it overwhelms the eye. It will lie in the invisible thing surrounding every living creature the atmosphere. Because before giant bodies crossed the land, before the oceans concealed enormous shadows, before skeletons made people of the present day look upward in awe, inside museums Earth had changed its breath. And within that ancient breath, the first giants began to appear. Now let our journey sink deeper into the ancient breath of Earth. Not a few thousand years, not even a few million years, but around 300 million years ago, when human beings had not yet appeared, mammals had not yet ruled birds, had not yet crossed the sky, and dinosaurs themselves were still a story that had not begun. At that time, this planet was passing through a period that scientists today call the Carboniferous, or the Coal Age. The name may sound dry, but behind it was a dark, damp, densely green world, strange enough that if we truly stood there, we might feel as though we had wandered into one of Earth's dreams. Before you is not a familiar forest. There are no soft leaves of oak or maple, no brilliant flowers glowing in the sunlight. Instead, there are vast swamp forests where ancient trunks rise like green towers in the mist. The ground is soft waterlogged, covered with decaying plant remains. Beneath your feet are black mud roots, stagnant water, fallen leaves, and layers of organic matter accumulated over thousands of years. Those very swamp forests, buried and compressed deep inside the earth, would later become the coal seams that human beings would mine hundreds of millions of years afterward. This is one of the reasons this period is called Carboniferous, meaning coal-bearing. The regions near the equator of the ancient supercontinent, Pangaea, once held vast coal swamp forests, and during some stages, the atmosphere contained higher levels of oxygen than it does today. The air here is not only damp, it is different. Earth's breath at that time was not the same as the breath of the planet today. During some stages of the late Carboniferous, the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere was higher than it is now, and that may have helped create one of the strangest chapters in the history of life, the age of giant insects and giant arthropods. But we need to move slowly here. We should not imagine oxygen as a magic wand that suddenly made every living thing grow larger. The truth is more delicate. Oxygen was a very important part of the picture, but alongside it were climate swamps, food, an environment with fewer aerial predators, and the particular limits of insect bodies. Stand still in that forest for a moment. You hear water dripping from the trunks. You hear mud shifting faintly beneath some movement your eyes have not yet caught. There is no bird song because birds do not yet exist. There are no large mammals running through the trees. The sky above may be far quieter than the sky we know today, but it is not completely empty. A thin shadow passes through the mist, then another. You look up and you see a creature resembling a dragonfly, but larger than any dragonfly in the modern world. its wings spread wide, thin, and veined, catching the dim light like pieces of living glass. This is the image of the giant flying insects, often called griffin flies, distant relatives of dragonflies today. Some species in this group could have wingspans reaching around 70 centimeters large enough that when they passed overhead, they were no longer a tiny speck in the air, but a true living shadow. The Natural History Museum describes these giant dragonfly-like insects as having flown over damp green lands around 300 million years ago, before dinosaurs had even evolved. Imagine a meganeura gliding over the surface of the swamp. It does not fly frantically like a small fly circling a lamp. Its movement may have been slower, broader, more majestic. Its large wings tremble gently in the thick, humid air. Beneath it, stagnant pools reflect ancient tree trunks. On the water's surface, larvae and small creatures swim quietly. Meganeura was not merely a decorative image of the prehistoric world. It was a predator. It could hunt other insects using its legs to seize prey, then tearing it apart with its hard mouth parts. In a world without predatory birds, without bats, without the later rulers of the sky, large flying insects may have had their own open space in which to expand their size. What makes insects special is the way they breathe. Unlike human beings, insects do not have lungs like ours. They take in oxygen through tiny openings on their bodies, called spiracles, then carry air inward through a network of very small tracheal tubes. For a small body, this system works efficiently. But as the body grows larger, delivering enough oxygen to the tissues can become a challenge. For that reason, scientists have long believed that the oxygen-rich atmosphere of the late Carboniferous helped insects and arthropods reach larger sizes. The Natural History Museum also presents this hypothesis when explaining why griffin flies could grow so large in air richer in oxygen than today's atmosphere. But science does not stand still. And this is what makes our story richer, not weaker. A study published in 2026 raised new questions about the older hypothesis was high oxygen. Truly the direct limit determining the maximum size of flying insects. This research suggested that oxygen diffusion through tiny tubes to the flight muscles may not be as simple a barrier as once thought. In other words, oxygen remains an important part of the Carboniferous context, but we should not say that giant insects existed only because of oxygen. Other factors may also have been involved, such as predation pressure, exoskeleton structure, habitat, and available resources. That is very important for the flow of our story. Because the question of this video is not about finding one single key that opens every door. Earth does not create giant creatures for one simple reason. It creates them when many conditions come together. In the Carboniferous, one of those conditions was an atmosphere richer in oxygen. But if there had been oxygen without swamp forests, without food, without a suitable environment, without ecological space for insects to grow, then gigantism may not have gone so far. Now lower your eyes from the sky and look down toward the ground. Because the giants of the Carboniferous did not only fly, they also crawled, crept, and moved silently through layers of rotting leaves beneath the forest canopy. In the damp darkness of the forest floor, there is a long, segmented, many-legged creature passing quietly like a living strip of armor. This is Arthropleura, one of the largest arthropods ever to live on land. It was not an insect in the narrow sense, but it belonged to the broader group of arthropods, the great family that includes insects, spiders, centipedes, millipedes, shrimp, and crabs. Some estimates suggest that Arthropleura could reach more than 2.5 meters in length, and some recent findings mention sizes of around 3 meters in large individuals. Imagine seeing it from a distance, not a small worm beneath a leaf, not a millipede resting neatly in the palm of your hand, but a body as long as a living log divided into many segments with rows of legs moving rhythmically over the mud. It does not need to rush. It does not need to roar. It does not need to rear up like a monster in frightening stories. Its presence alone is enough to change the scale of the entire forest. Things that seem tiny in our imagination are suddenly magnified to an uncanny degree. A creature we might connect today with a millipede once reached a size comparable to a large animal. And the interesting thing is that Arthropleura may not have been a terrifying predator. New fossil discoveries with a better preserved head suggest that it was more likely a creature that ate decaying plant matter or decomposing organic material, closer in role to modern millipedes than to predatory centipedes. Reuters reported in 2024 that juvenile Arthropleura fossils from France helped scientists better understand its head and feeding habits, showing that it was not a killer in the swamp, but may have been a giant forest cleaner slowly feeding on plant material. That image gives the Carboniferous world more depth. Not every large creature had to be a predatory monster. Some giants lived by eating decomposing grinding and helping return matter to the forest's cycle. In a world filled with vegetation, where trunks fell into mud leaves, accumulated, and water-preserved organic remains in oxygen-poor swamps, creatures like Arthropleura may have played a quiet but important role. It moved through the forest floor like a slow biological machine, leaving no loud sound behind, but leaving traces of a period when even the creatures underfoot could reach sizes that astonish us. Here we begin to understand why the Carboniferous is such a powerful first piece in the story of giant creatures. Trees produced organic matter. Swamps held and buried those plant layers. The long-term burial of carbon was connected to an increase in atmospheric oxygen. An oxygen-rich atmosphere, in turn, may have helped certain groups of arthropods overcome limits they face in the modern world. But alongside that, the broad, wet, food-rich environment and an ecosystem structure very different from today's also opened spaces for life to experiment. You can imagine the Carboniferous forest as a gigantic green room where everything is wet, slow, and dense. Ancient trees did not have the familiar appearance of modern forests. Many plants did not produce flowers. Some plant groups looked like giant ferns, horsetail-like towers, or scale-barked trees. They grew in waterlogged lands, then died, fell, sank into mud. Their remains were not fully decomposed as they are in many forests today. One layer built upon another. Time pressed down. Earth stored them within itself. And hundreds of millions of years later, human beings would dig up those black masses and burn them for heat and energy, never realizing that within them once lingered the shadow of a forest that had nourished the first strange creatures of the age of giants. But within that forest, the richness of oxygen also had another side. Oxygen helps life burn brighter, but oxygen also makes fire easier to ignite. Studies of ancient atmospheres suggest that when oxygen rose, wildfires could become more common in landscapes with abundant plant matter. Imagine lightning striking a drier part of the forest after a season of change. Fire catches on the trunks, spreads through the carpet of vegetation, burning an air richer in oxygen. Red flames reflect on the black swamp water. Small creatures flee into water mud and root hollows. And after the fire passes, the forest grows again, matter accumulates again, and the planet continues its cycle. So, the Carboniferous was not a peaceful paradise. It was a living, powerful, sometimes dangerous, and constantly changing world. Beneath the slow appearance of the swamps, immense processes were unfolding. Plants, absorbing carbon plant remains being buried, the atmosphere changing arthropods, diversifying the first great flyers, expanding their power in the air and the ground, becoming a stage for bodies with outer skeletons. Many legs, many segments, larger than anything we usually associate with the word insect. Perhaps if a modern person truly stepped into that place, the first feeling would not be terror, but dislocation. Dislocation because everything is familiar and unfamiliar at once. There is forest, but not our forest. There are insects, but so large they no longer resemble insects in our memory. There are swamps, but so wide and deep they seem like worlds of their own. There is air to breathe, but its composition and feeling belong to another planet. And in that dislocation, one would realize that Earth does not have one fixed shape. This planet has become many different versions of itself again and again. When we say that oxygen-fed giant insects, we should not understand it as a miracle. Understand it as an opening condition. In an atmosphere richer in oxygen, the tiny respiratory systems of insects could function in a more favorable way. In an environment with fewer aerial predators, large wings were not forced to become small, fast, and constantly evasive as they would be later. In food-rich swamps with places to shelter, arthropods could become more diverse, larger, and bolder. Gigantism, therefore, did not come from one single cause, but from the resonance of an entire world. And then, like every world in Earth's history, the Carboniferous did not stand still. The swamp forests that had once spread widely would eventually contract. Climate changed, continents shifted, environments became drier in some places, new ecosystems appeared. The advantages that had once helped giant insects and arthropods flourish gradually became less powerful. As land vertebrates diversified, as the sky and ground gained new predators, as survival pressures changed, giant size was no longer always the best choice. A large body that had once been an advantage in the swamp forest could become slow, costly, and vulnerable in another world. That is the first lesson of the Age of Giants. Size never exists on its own. It always needs a world to support it. When that world is suitable, an insect can open wings as wide as the shadow of a bird. A many-legged creature can crawl across the forest floor at a length we can hardly believe. But when the world changes, those very bodies must face their own limits. Earth once allowed them to grow large, but Earth never promised to keep those conditions unchanged forever. And tonight, as we look back at the Carboniferous, what remains is not only the image of a giant dragonfly gliding across a swamp. What remains is the feeling that life is deeply sensitive to the breath of the planet. If the atmosphere changes, if forests change, if water and soil change, living forms can become different to an almost unimaginable degree. Giant insects were not a mistake of nature. They were life's answer to an Earth that was once very different. But after those dark, damp forests, the planet continued to transform. Swamps were no longer the whole story. New groups of creatures began to step onto the land. Large bodies no longer belonged only to insects and arthropods. Earth began trying other designs, bones on the inside instead of armor on the outside. Stronger legs, different lungs, different ways of moving, and new forms of competition in changing landscapes. Before dinosaurs appeared, there was another world of strange creatures, the first evolutionary experiments on the road toward large bodies. And that is where our journey will continue. After the dark, damp swamp forests of the Carboniferous Earth did not stop. The stagnant waters, the ancient tree trunks, the giant insects gliding through an atmosphere richer in oxygen than today's. All of it was only the first chapter in the long story of gigantism. The planet continued to turn. The continents continued to drift slowly. The climate continued to change. In some places, dense forests began to retreat. Drier lands started to expand, and life on land entered a new age where large size no longer belonged only to creatures with outer skeletons, many legs and thin wings moving through the mist. If you keep walking through the doorway of time, the wet forest behind you slowly fades away. The air is still ancient, but the landscape has changed. The ground is wider. Swamps no longer cover everything. In the distance, there are hotter, drier lands, dusty red riverbanks, and open plains beneath a harsh sun. Plants are still present, but they are not always as dense as before. This world no longer feels like a green room flooded with water. It begins to feel like a giant continent testing itself against heat, dry seasons, dust storms, and greater distances between places of water and places of food. This is when Earth gradually entered the Permian period, a very important age before dinosaurs appeared. Many people, when thinking of ancient creatures, jump straight from giant insects to dinosaurs, as if there were nothing memorable between those two worlds. But the truth is that before dinosaurs became symbols of size and power, Earth had another stage. On that stage, stranger creatures lower to the ground, heavier, and sometimes closer to the distant ancestors of mammals than to dinosaurs, once stepped across mud riverbanks and dry, sunburned plains. The first thing that changed was how large bodies were built. With giant insects and arthropods, the body was wrapped in an external skeleton. But when size increased too much, that outer armor had its own limits. It had to be shed in order for the animal to grow. It was heavy. It held the body within a certain kind of structure. Meanwhile, land vertebrates carried a different design, a skeleton on the inside. The body could grow around an internal supporting frame. Muscles could attach to bones, lungs could draw air into the body, and legs could lift the torso above the ground. That design was not perfect from the beginning, but it opened a new road toward gigantism. At this point, Earth did not create monsters through magic. It created them through experiment. Every river, every drying lake, every hot plain, every long dry season became a test. The creature that found food continued. The creature that tolerated heat continued. The creature that moved better across wide lands gained another chance to survive. The creature that hunted more effectively or avoided being hunted more successfully left behind more descendants. Across millions of years, small changes accumulated. A stronger leg, a different jaw, a larger body to retain water, hold heat, or resist enemies. And so, very slowly, Earth once again began to create forms that people today would look at and call by one simple word, monsters. But monsters here does not mean evil. It is only the way human imagination responds to bodies too different from what we know. A creature several meters long with a low body, strong legs, a large jaw, and a strange sail rising from its back, moving along a Permian riverbank in red sunlight may look to us like something stepping out of mythology. But in its own world, it was simply an animal living its life. It was hungry, it needed water, it avoided heat, it searched for a mate, it defended its place in the food chain. It was part of an ecosystem, not a mistake of nature. One of the most famous names from this period is Dimetrodon. Many people have seen its image in children's books, films, or toy models, and it is very easy to mistake it for a dinosaur. But Dimetrodon was not a dinosaur. It lived long before dinosaurs during the Permian and belonged to a group called synapsids, a branch of life distantly connected to the evolutionary line that would eventually lead to mammals. In other words, although it may look outwardly like an ancient reptile in the great family tree of life, it stands closer to the distant ancestral side of mammals than to dinosaurs. Imagine Dimetrodon lying still beside a shallow bank in the morning. Its body is low, its four legs set close to the ground, its long head and sharp jaws turned toward the mud where smaller creatures are moving. Along its back rises a large sail supported by long, bony spines extending upward from the vertebrae. For many years, people often explained this sail as a tool for regulating temperature, absorbing morning sunlight, or releasing heat when the body became too warm. Today, scientists still discuss its exact function, including the possibility that the sail was connected to display recognition or attracting mates. But whatever its most important function was, that image still tells us one thing. Evolution did not only make creatures larger, it also made bodies stranger in order to adapt to the world around them. In a warmer and drier land, temperature was no longer a minor detail. It became an invisible force shaping life. A small body heats up quickly, cools down quickly, and is easily influenced by the environment. A large body changes temperature more slowly. It can keep heat more stable over a longer period, but it may also struggle if the environment becomes too hot or too dry. For that reason, large size always stands between two sides. It can make a creature stronger, harder to attack, able to travel farther and better at storing energy. But it also forces that creature to eat more, drink more, and find more suitable shelter when the world becomes harsh. Food is another factor. Without abundant food, giant creatures cannot exist for long. A large body is a large fire. It needs constant fuel. In the Permian world, land plants had developed far beyond the early days when life first moved onto land. Seed plants, more drought-tolerant forests, and new kinds of vegetation opened new sources of energy for plant-eating animals. And once plant eaters grew larger, predators were pulled into the race as well. Larger prey could give larger predators an advantage. Larger predators, in turn, placed pressure on prey to become stronger, more numerous, more alert, or larger still. That is a very slow spiral of evolution. There are no drums. There is no single moment when Earth announces that from now on, creatures will become gigantic. Everything happens across countless generations. A young animal is born with a slightly stronger jaw. An individual has slightly sturdier legs. A species develops a larger body and is therefore attacked less often by predators once fully grown. If those differences are useful, they are preserved. If they are not useful, they disappear. And over enough time, a land that once held only smaller creatures can become a place where heavy bodies pass through, where large footprints press into mud, where life begins to occupy more space upon the ground. Beside Dimetrodon, there were many other Permian creatures that are less famous today, but that also contributed to the strange feeling of the world before dinosaurs. There were plant-eating species with sturdy bodies and large heads moving slowly across dry land. There were sharp-toothed predators that did not need to run like modern mammals, but were dangerous enough within their own ecosystems. There were large amphibians still tied to water, lying in wait in marshes, lakes, and shallow rivers for prey to come near. There were synapsid groups evolving in many different directions, some rougher and more reptile-like others, beginning to carry distant features that would foreshadow the world of mammals far in the future. What makes this period fascinating is that it was not merely a simple draft version of the dinosaur age. It was a world of its own. If later dinosaurs would have very different postures, ways of moving, and body structures, Permian creatures often seemed heavier, lower, closer to the ground. Many species looked as if they were trying to lift the body out of the mud, but had not yet completely left behind an older way of walking. They did not seem as agile as many later predators. But they carried the weight of a transitional age, when life on land was learning how to become larger, more complex, and more daring. And above it all was Pangaea, the enormous supercontinent. Imagine almost all the land on Earth gathered into one vast mass. Around the edges there was ocean, but deep in the interior, the distance to the sea was immense. That meant many regions could become drier, hotter, and more seasonally harsh. A continent that large created immense spaces for life to spread, but it also created harsh challenges. Not every place was wet. Not every season brought water. In those lands, creatures had to adapt to instability, to heat, to competition, and to the fact that food was not always found in the same place. This is why the title of this journey contains three very important words: food, climate, and evolution. Food provides the energy that allows large bodies to exist. Climate decides where forests grow, where dry lands spread, where water remains, and where dead zones appear. And evolution is the quiet process that turns those conditions into body shapes. When these three elements meet, Earth can create large, strange creatures, sometimes frightening in the eyes of modern humans. But when one of the three changes too strongly, everything can collapse very quickly. At the end of the Permian, Earth entered one of the greatest crises in the history of life. This is the event scientists often call the end Permian extinction, or sometimes the Great Dying. The seas lost much of their diversity. On land, many animal groups also disappeared or suffered severe decline. Creatures that had once dominated plains' riverbanks and hot, dry regions could no longer hold their place. A world that had already been harsh became far harsher. Temperature, atmosphere, oceans, volcanoes, the carbon cycle, and life were swept into a massive upheaval. Imagine a landscape after that catastrophe. The sky is dim and murky. Forests are no longer as dense as before. Rivers have become shallower in some places. The ground is more open, hotter, poorer in life. There are fewer sounds. Species that were once familiar within the old ecosystem have vanished. Large footprints no longer press thickly into the mud. Life remains, but it has been narrowed like a small flame left after a great fire. And it is in that moment that we understand another important truth. Earth can create monsters, but Earth can also erase the entire stage they need in order to exist. After the end Permian crisis, some creatures survived. The survivor is not always the largest, the strongest, or the most frightening. Sometimes the survivor is the more flexible one, the one that can eat more kinds of food, reproduce better, endure more, or simply has a body suited to a wounded world. Lystrosaurus, a plant-eating synapsid, is a famous example of survival after that upheaval. It was not a giant monster in the overwhelming sense, but it shows that in Earth's history, large size is not always the final key. When environments collapse, endurance can sometimes matter more than grandeur. So, the world before dinosaurs teaches us a different lesson from the Carboniferous. If the Carboniferous shows that atmosphere and swamps could open the way for giant insects, then the Permian world shows that food, climate, and evolution could continually create new kinds of monsters. Some species were large because they ate plants and needed bodies big enough to process rough food. Some were large because they hunted large prey. Some carried strange structures on the back, on the head, in the jaws, or in the way they walked. Some were not the largest of all, but survived better when the old world ended. This makes the story of giant creatures deeper. We cannot look at the past as a simple parade of animals becoming larger and larger. Earth does not move in a straight line. It opens, closes, then opens again. It creates conditions for certain large bodies to appear, then changes those conditions and causes them to disappear. It experiments with external armor, then with internal bones. It experiments with swamps, then with dry plains. It experiments with large flyers, then with low, heavy creatures on the ground. Every time the world changes, life must answer with its body. And perhaps that is why ancient Earth kept creating the creatures we call monsters. Not because this planet loved terror, not because the past was a nightmare filled with teeth and claws, but because evolution always works with what is available. If there is food, space, survival, pressure, time, and a body design that allows it, life will try to go farther. It will make legs stronger, jaws larger, bodies longer, mass heavier. And if the world continues to support it, that creature will step forward across millions of years. But in the darkness after the end Permian extinction, a new question began to form. When the old rulers vanished, ecological gaps opened. Empty lands needed new plant eaters. Broken food chains needed to be reconnected. Old predators left the stage, and the survivors began adapting to an Earth that had changed. From those ashes, a new age would slowly appear. At first, it was not magnificent. There were no bodies immediately as long as living towers. There were no giant herds making the ground tremble from the very beginning. There were only smaller, faster, more resilient species quietly searching for a place in the world after disaster. Then, over time, a new group of creatures began to rise. They would not become large only because there was food. They would not survive only because they tolerated heat or dryness better. They would carry within their bodies a different formula for gigantism, a way of standing, a way of breathing, a way of eating, a way of reproducing, a way for bones to become lighter, while still strong enough to support a body that would surpass every land animal before it. But that story belongs to the next step of our journey. Here in the world before dinosaurs, we only need to pause for a moment and look back at the creatures that opened the way. They were Earth's first experiments on the road toward large bodies. They lived in worlds that were hotter, drier, wider, and harsher after the Carboniferous. They show that gigantism does not need to appear only once. It can return in many forms when conditions change and evolution finds a new path. And before giant long necks stretched through the canopies of a later age, before the footsteps of dinosaurs became the greatest imagined sound of prehistory, Earth had already had other giants lower, stranger, and quieter, moving across the land like the great drafts of life. Imagine you are standing at the edge of an ancient plain on a morning unimaginably far away. The air is still blurred with mist. Light slips across low vegetation and taller trunks in the distance. The ground beneath your feet is drier than the swamps of the Carboniferous, but there are still dense patches of plants, riverbanks, and stretches of vegetation spreading outward. Then from far away, a slow movement begins to appear. At first, it is only shadows rising higher than the trees. Then long necks lift into the light. And then an entire herd of sauropods emerges, not noisy, not hurried, but with every footstep making the ground seem to pulse with a deep tremor beneath it. An animal like this, seen only from a distance, might make us think simply it was large because the world at that time allowed it to be large. But the real answer is far more subtle. The world had to be suitable, yes. Food had to be abundant, the climate had to endure, and the ecosystem had to have room for giant bodies. But environment alone was not enough. If the body was not built in the right way, great size would become its own prison. A neck too heavy would drag the body down. A head too large would prevent the neck from reaching far. A skeleton too dense would make the weight unbearable. A respiratory system too inefficient would fail to deliver enough oxygen through a body dozens of meters long. And a reproductive strategy too slow would make the population difficult to sustain through upheaval. Sauropods became gigantic because many pieces worked together. Studies of sauropod gigantism often emphasize that there was no single reason. Instead, there was a chain of evolutionary factors linked together, the way they fed the head and neck, a bird-like respiratory system, reproduction through eggs' growth rate, and the way the body managed energy. It was this combination, not a single miracle, that helped sauropods become the largest animals ever to walk on land. First, look at the neck. For a giant plant-eating creature, food was not merely a need. Food was the center of its entire life. The larger a body is, the more energy it requires. But if a giant animal had to constantly move its entire body weighing tens of tons just to find each cluster of leaves, it would waste too much energy. Sauropods had a very special solution they carried with them, a long neck like a living crane. A long neck allowed them to reach many feeding areas without moving the whole body. They could sweep their heads across a wide area, feeding high, feeding low, feeding to either side, as though the body were a great pillar and the neck a slow arm searching for food around it. That may sound simple, but it was profoundly important. Imagine a modern elephant using its trunk to gather food without having to keep walking. Sauropods did not have trunks, but their long necks performed a similar task on a much greater scale. The neck expanded the feeding space around the body. One fewer step meant a portion of energy preserved. A wider range of leaves within reach meant the giant body could continue taking in food without wasting too much effort. The Natural History Museum also emphasizes that long necks helped sauropods access food high-low and across a wide range while reducing the need to move their massive bodies. But a long neck could only exist if the head was small. This is one of the most elegant parts of the sauropod body plan. If their heads had been large, heavy, and filled with powerful jaw muscles, like many herbivores that chew thoroughly, the neck would have carried an enormous burden. But sauropods had heads that were relatively small compared with their bodies. They did not use their mouths like complex grinding machines. They did not chew thoroughly like cattle horses or elephants. They used their teeth to cut, strip, and pull plants into the mouth, then swallowed them. In simpler terms, they did not try to turn the mouth into a food processing factory. They moved that factory deeper inside the body. This brings us to the second piece, the belly. A giant sauropod body was not only bone and skin, it was also a large, slow, durable digestive system capable of processing enormous amounts of plant matter. The plants of that time were not soft foods prepared in advance. Many kinds of food may have been tough, coarse, and poorer in energy than meat. To live on plants, a large creature needed either to chew thoroughly or to have a digestive tract large enough and slow enough for breakdown to take place inside. Sauropods chose the second path. They ate a great deal, swallowed a great deal, and allowed the body within to do the slow work that remained. Imagine a sauropod standing among low vegetation. Its head moves steadily without haste. Its teeth pull, leaves its mouth takes in food, Its neck swallows in repeated waves. Inside that vast body, food moves like slow currents of matter through a gigantic biological factory. To human eyes, the scene may not be as dramatic as a hunt, but biologically it is a marvel. A creature weighing tens of tons had to turn leaves, soft branches, low plants, and many other kinds of vegetation into the energy needed to support an entire living body. Each day of its life was a quiet negotiation with food. Then comes the skeleton. If a sauropod had simply been a large animal with dense, heavy bones, it may never have reached such size. A large body needs strong bones, but bones that are too heavy make the body difficult to operate. In many sauropods, especially in the vertebrae of the neck and trunk, the bones contained hollow spaces or air-filled structures connected to the air sac system. To imagine it simply, their skeletons were not solid blocks of stone. They were more like structures designed to bear weight while reducing mass. The empty spaces inside did not make the body weak in a simple way. When organized properly, they helped make the bones lighter while still preserving their ability to support weight. This is one of the reasons sauropods differed from later giant land mammals. An elephant has a dense skeleton and a heavy body in the mammalian way. Sauropods, however, carried within themselves a kind of structure closer to the system we see in modern birds, with air sacs and air-filled bones in many dinosaur groups. This does not mean sauropods were light like birds, or that they could fly, of course not. But it does mean that their giant bodies were lightened by very special structures. A long neck, if made entirely of dense bone and heavy flesh, would almost certainly have been impossible to operate at that scale. But air-filled bones helped make that neck possible. From the skeleton, we move to the breath. A giant creature does not only need to stand firmly, it needs to breathe efficiently. In sauropods, scientists believe the respiratory system shared many similarities with the breathing system of birds with air sacs, helping air move efficiently through the lungs. This is a very important point because a long and massive body requires a gas exchange system good enough to sustain activity. If the neck is long, the pathway of air also becomes a problem. If the body is large, delivering oxygen to the tissues demands even greater efficiency. A bird-like respiratory system not only supported gas exchange, but was also connected to the air-filled bones that lightened the body's frame. Imagine a sauropod breathing in the ancient morning, not with short, rushed breaths, but with deep, steady rhythms passing through a gigantic body, like wind moving through hollow chambers in stone. The long neck rises, the ribcage opens, air enters, passes through, then leaves the body through a system far more complex than our first impression of a large and slow animal might suggest. Inside that slowness was a refined biological technique created not by intention, but by millions of years of selection. But sauropods did not only need to live, they needed to maintain their populations. And here, their reproductive strategy also contributed to the formula of gigantism. Unlike large mammals, sauropods did not carry a large baby inside the body for a long period, and then give birth to only a few young. They laid eggs. Sauropod eggs, though large to us, were small compared with the body size of the adult mother. This created a very significant difference. A giant mother could produce more eggs than if she had to invest in a few very large offspring, as many mammals do. Studies of sauropods emphasize that this reproductive strategy was an important part of how they maintained populations despite their enormous adult size. Picture a nesting ground on ancient land, not a scene of a mother caring for her young in the style of modern mammals. Perhaps many nests were placed in warm earth under layers of plant material, or in areas chosen according to environmental conditions. From those eggs, hatchlings emerged very small compared with the immense image of their parents. A creature that could grow into a body of tens of tons began life in a far more fragile form. That makes gigantism even stranger. It did not appear instantly. It was a long journey of growth, from a small creature in a dangerous world to an adult body that almost no predator would dare attack easily. Because young sauropods were small, they may have been very vulnerable. They could have been hunted by many different animals. But if enough were born, and if some of them survived those dangerous early years, the population could continue. This was a different strategy from investing heavily in only a few offspring. It suited a lineage of animals that could lay many eggs and whose adult size far surpassed the juvenile stage. In the story of gigantism, this is very important. It was not only the adult body that had to be adapted, but the entire life cycle had to fit. Then there is growth rate. A sauropod could not take too long to reach a safer size if its young were small and vulnerable to predators. Evidence from bones suggests that many sauropods may have grown quickly relative to their eventual gigantic size. This does not mean they became enormous in just a few short years, like a miracle. But it does show that their bodies were capable of building enormous mass during their lifetimes. Imagine growth rings in bone, like faint lines of writing, recording the developmental rhythm of a creature dead for hundreds of millions of years. In stone, that body still tells us that gigantism was not only about living long, it was also about growing in a way fast enough to survive. It is also important to remember that not all dinosaurs were gigantic. This is a very important point if the story is to remain accurate. There were small, quick, light dinosaurs, some only the size of a chicken or a small dog. There were large predators, armored herbivores, horned species, crested species, feathered species, and many different forms. But sauropods were the branch that pushed size on land to its most extraordinary limit. When we ask why were dinosaurs so large, the central question of this chapter is really why were sauropods in particular able to go so far? Part of the answer lies in posture. Sauropods had 4 large legs, relatively straight and sturdy, like supporting columns beneath the body. When a body is extremely heavy, posture becomes crucial. The legs must transmit weight to the ground efficiently. Joints, bones, muscles, and tendons must work together so that each step does not become a crisis. We can imagine they did not leap and dart lightly like small animals. They moved with slow weight. But slow does not mean clumsy. Slowness can be the way a giant body conserves energy, maintains stability, and lives long in a world where there is no need to hurry at every moment. The long tail was also part of that shape. It balanced the body, extended the body's axis, and in some species became a notable structure, almost like a living whip. But in this chapter, the important thing is not to turn the tail into a weapon or symbol, but to see the entire sauropod body as a biological bridge. 4 legs were the pillars. The trunk was the central mass. The neck stretched forward to seek food. The tail extended behind for balance. The small head kept the neck from being overloaded. Air-filled bones lightened the frame. Efficient breathing kept the body functioning. The stomach and intestines processed huge amounts of plant matter. Eggs and hatchlings created a life cycle capable of sustaining the lineage. Return to the ancient plain at the beginning of the chapter. The herd of sauropods is still moving through the dim light. A smaller youngster walks near the feet of the larger animals. Farther away, a few adults lift their necks high, pulling leaves from branches. They do not know that they are giants. They do not know that hundreds of millions of years later, human beings will dig up their bones, assemble them in museums, measure each vertebra, debate each hypothesis, and stand beneath their shadows in astonishment. For them, this is simply another morning on ancient Earth, a morning to eat, to move, to survive, to grow, and to continue the cycle of life. Perhaps what makes sauropods so captivating is not only their size, it is the calmness of that size. They did not need to be predatory monsters to overwhelm us. They were leaf-eating giants, living bodies that turned vegetation into movement time, into bone, and a planet full of plants into energy for walking. In them, we see a very different kind of power, the power of endurance, of body design, of using a vast world through a slow but efficient rhythm of life. And within them, we also see fragility. A giant body requires many conditions in order to exist. It needs enough food. It needs an environment wide enough. It needs a climate that does not change too quickly. It needs places to lay eggs. It needs hatchlings to have a chance to grow. It needs an ecosystem capable of supporting thousands, even millions of days of feeding and movement. As long as everything functioned, sauropods were a pinnacle of life on land. But that greatness always depended on the world outside. Without a suitable planet, no giant could remain standing. But land was not the only place where life tried to surpass the limits of size. Somewhere else where weight was supported by water, where blue darkness concealed gigantic bodies, the rules of growing large would be different again. And in the ancient sky, there were creatures that were not birds, yet once spread wide wings over a planet without human voices. Sauropods have shown us the formula of giants on land. Next, we will turn toward ancient seas and ancient skies, where water and air created entirely different kinds of monsters. After standing on land with the long-necked sauropods, we begin to understand that gigantism on land is a very difficult thing. A large body must fight against its own weight. The bones must be strong enough, the legs must be steady enough, the breath must be efficient enough, and every day there must be enough food to sustain a gigantic body. But if you leave the ground, if you step down into the sea, or lift your gaze toward the sky, those rules begin to change. Life still pays a price for large size, but that price is not the same everywhere. Imagine you are standing on the shore of an ancient sea. Not the familiar beach of the present, where there are human footprints, distant lights, or the sound of motorboats. This is a shoreline from the Mesozoic era, tens to hundreds of millions of years ago. The air is warmer. Sea levels are sometimes higher. Shallow waters stretch across the continents. On the surface of the sea, the light glimmers in a peaceful way, but beneath it lies an entirely different world. There, water conceals scale. Water makes sound feel farther away. Water turns a large shadow into something vague until it comes close enough that our imagination no longer has time to prepare. In the ocean, a large body has one advantage that it does not have on land: buoyancy. On land, a giant creature must support almost all of its weight with bones, joints, and muscles. But in water, the body is partly lifted. A large marine creature does not have to place its entire weight down through each footstep. It can drift, glide, and turn within an environment that embraces its body. That does not mean becoming gigantic in the sea is easy. A large body still needs enormous amounts of food, still needs to breathe, still needs to reproduce, still needs to avoid disease and competition. But the sea allows life to test sizes that the land often cannot support. And so in the ancient oceans, Earth once created creatures that human beings would later call, by a very understandable name, sea monsters. But we need to be clear from the beginning. Plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, pliosaurs, and mosasaurs were not dinosaurs. They were ancient marine reptiles, living at the same time as dinosaurs or near the age of dinosaurs, but they did not belong to the group of land-dwelling dinosaurs. This is an important point because popular imagination often gathers every prehistoric creature into one box called dinosaurs. In reality, the history of life is far more complex. Beside the dinosaurs on land, the seas had their own dynasties, their own predators, and bodies shaped by water according to its own laws. Let us descend slowly into those waters. Light on the sea's surface breaks into silver bands. Beneath it, ammonites drift like ancient spiral shells. Schools of small fish change direction all at once, like a living cloth pulled through the water. Then, from the dark blue distance, a long shape appears. Its body is streamlined like a fish, its eyes large, its snout extended, its four limbs transformed into paddles. It may be an ichthyosaur, a group of marine reptiles whose shape easily reminds us of modern dolphins, even though they were not dolphins and were not mammals. That similar shape did not come from close kinship, but from something deeper. When many species live in the same environment and face the same demands, evolution sometimes leads them towards similar solutions. A body that wants to move quickly through water often becomes streamlined. The front and hind limbs can transform into fins or paddles. The tail can help push the body forward. Large eyes help with vision in low light. A long snout and sharp teeth help catch fish or slippery prey. Ichthyosaurs are a beautiful example of how the ocean sculpts the body. Underwater shape cannot be arbitrary. A body that is too bulky will be slowed by water. A movement that is too clumsy will let prey escape. So the sea both allows the body to become larger and forces that body to become smoother, more economical, more in harmony with the current. But not every ancient sea monster had the shape of a dolphin. Another shadow appears in the water, slower, stranger. Its neck is long, its body broad, its four limbs like paddles, its head much smaller than the body. This is the familiar image of many plesiosaurs. If the ichthyosaur is like a living arrow, the plesiosaur is like a creature assembled from things that seem as though they should not belong together. A body like a boat, paddles like a sea turtle, and a long neck like a question reaching through dark water. They did not need to resemble fish in order to survive. They had another way of living in the sea, another style of movement, another way of hunting a slower rhythm that was no less frightening to the smaller creatures around them. Imagine a plesiosaur swimming silently through shallow water. Its four paddles push the water in a steady rhythm without noise. Its long neck can reach into a school of fish in a moment of surprise. But we should not turn it too much into a mythical sea serpent. It was a real animal with real limits. A long neck helped it reach prey in a special way, but it also had to obey the constraints of bone muscle water and movement. It is precisely this blend of strangeness and practicality that makes the plesiosaur one of the most captivating images of the ancient sea. It looks like a legend, but it was created by evolution. Then there were other relatives, heavier and more intense. Pliosaurs with larger heads and shorter necks carried the shape of direct predators. If the long-necked plesiosaur evokes silence and mystery, the pliosaur feels like a mass of strength moving through water. Large jaws, powerful teeth, a massive body, strong paddles. In an ocean full of prey, a large predator can become the center of fear. But once again, this was not meaningless brutality. A large predator exists because the ecosystem beneath it contains enough energy. Beneath those teeth lies an entire food chain: plankton, small fish, larger fish, ancient squid, and other marine reptiles. Without that foundation, no monster could live for long. Later in the late Cretaceous, mosasaurs became one of the prominent groups of marine reptile predators. They were not dinosaurs, and they were not plesiosaurs. They were more distantly related to lizards and snakes. Imagine a long, strong body, wide jaws, a powerful tail gliding through warm seas. Mosasaurs did not need the graceful strangeness of plesiosaurs to make an impression. They carried another kind of strength, closer to the image of a muscular predator of the sea. But whether ichthyosaur, plesiosaur, pliosaur, or mosasaur, all of them reveal one shared principle: when life returns to the sea, the body can be remade according to the laws of water. The strange thing is that many of these groups had ancestors that lived on land. The history of life is not a one-way road from sea to land and then finished. Many times, vertebrate animals returned to the sea. Legs became paddles. Bodies changed to swim better. Reproduction, breathing, and hunting all had to adapt to the water. But because they were still air-breathing reptiles, many species had to rise to the surface to breathe. Imagine a calm sea suddenly breaking open as a large body rises. A breath, a ripple. Then the shadow sinks again. The ocean keeps its secret once more. Here we see that water both helps and limits. Water supports the body, but water is also cold, heavy, resistant to movement, and does not allow breathing as air does. A large marine creature must know how to retain heat, find food, navigate surface, at the right moment to take in air and survive in a three-dimensional space broader than any forest. The ocean has no fixed paths, no visible dens, no clear boundary between one territory and another. An animal in the sea lives amid depth currents, fading light, rising pressure, and hunts that can begin from any direction. That is why large size in the sea can be a strength. A large body helps retain heat better in water. It helps travel farther. It allows a creature to hunt larger prey or avoid being attacked by many smaller predators. In some cases, large size can also help a creature dive deeper, go farther, and store energy more effectively. But it also demands a significant food supply. A poor ocean cannot sustain giants. Ancient sea monsters did not appear in emptiness. They were signs of complex marine ecosystems where energy moved from the smallest organisms all the way up to the largest predators. And while the sea opened one path toward large size, the sky created the opposite challenge. If water supports the body, air is far less generous. To fly, a creature must overcome gravity with wings, muscles, light bones, and precise movement. On land, a large body is already difficult. In the sea, a large body is helped by water. But in the sky, the larger the body becomes, the heavier the price. A wider wing requires stronger muscles. A heavier body requires more lift. A small mistake in structure can make flight impossible. And yet ancient Earth once had flying giants. They were pterosaurs, the first vertebrates to evolve active-powered flight with wings. They were not birds. They were not dinosaurs either, though they were relatives within a broader ancient reptile group. They were their own branch, with wings made from a membrane of skin stretched from the body to an extremely elongated fourth finger. If birds transformed the whole feather-covered forelimb Into a wing, pterosaurs created wings through another architecture, a light skeletal frame, a large wing membrane, and a body optimized for leaving the ground. Imagine you are standing on an ancient coastal plain at dusk. Wind moves across the water. Small creatures stir in the mud. Then against the sky, a large shadow glides past. It is not a bird, because modern birds had not yet come to rule the sky as they do today. It is not a bat, because bats would not appear until much later. It is a pterosaur, its broad wings spread open, its body suspended between wind and the last light of day. For smaller species, that image might have been quick, like a slash across the sky. But with giants such as Quetzalcoatlus, we can imagine a different kind of presence, slower, broader, like a gigantic living kite, using the air to travel far. Quetzalcoatlus is often mentioned as one of the largest flying animals ever known, with an estimated wingspan of around 10 to 11 meters. But what is astonishing is not only that number. What is astonishing is that a body like that could fly. To do so, pterosaurs needed light bones, many air spaces, a body not too heavy relative to wing area, and a suitable method of takeoff. Modern studies often suggest that many large pterosaurs may have launched themselves using all four limbs, almost like a powerful vault, from the ground, rather than relying only on the two hind legs as birds do. Although the details are still discussed, the general idea is clear. To become gigantic in the sky, the body had to be designed almost to the limit. This makes pterosaurs different from sauropods. Sauropods could set 4 feet on the ground and use strong pillar-like bones to support the body. Pterosaurs did not have that luxury when flying. They had to turn lightness into strength. They had to have hollow bones, but not bones too weak. Wide wings, but not wings too easy to tear. Muscles strong enough, but not so heavy that the body became too massive. Every part of the body was a negotiation with the air. If it became a little heavier, flying became harder. If the wings became a little smaller, lift decreased. If the bones became denser, the body became safer in a collision, but more difficult to lift from the ground. Gigantism in the sky, then, was not simple enlargement. It was an art of balance. Let us look at pterosaurs in a gentler way. They were not only flying monsters, they were creatures living in the wind. Some may have hunted fish at the water's surface. Some may have walked on land better than we once imagined, searching for food along coasts, plains, or mudflats. Some had large crests on their heads, possibly used for recognition display or other functions. They lived in very different worlds, from coastlines to inland environments, from small light species to giants that gave the Mesozoic sky its own majesty. When they flew, the air was no longer empty space. It became a habitat, a road, and a challenge. Between sea and sky, we begin to see something very beautiful in natural history. Each environment creates a different kind of giant. On land, gigantism means bearing weight, standing firm, eating enough, and not collapsing under one's own mass. In the sea, gigantism means using buoyancy, retaining heat, swimming efficiently, and finding enough food in a vast space. In the sky, gigantism means being light enough to take off, strong enough to fly, and precise enough not to be pulled down by gravity. All are large size, but there is no single formula for every place. That is why this chapter is not only about larger creatures. It is about how the environment rewrites the body. Water writes upon the body with curves, fins, paddles, streamlined forms, and buoyancy. Air writes upon the body with hollow bones, broad wings, flight membranes, strong muscles, and the saving of weight. Land writes upon the body with pillar-like legs, weight-bearing bones, long necks, and large bellies. Life reads those rules not through consciousness, but through selection. Individuals that fit better survive. Bodies that use their environment better leave descendants. Over time, form becomes the answer. And when we call them monsters, perhaps it is only because we are seeing them from our own very small world. A plesiosaur swimming through ancient seas did not know it was strange. A mosasaur did not know it was terrifying. A giant pterosaur did not know it made modern humans look upward in awe. They simply lived according to the laws of body and environment. They passed through their days like all other creatures, finding food, avoiding danger, reproducing, growing, aging, dying. Only later, when their bones remained in stone, when human beings dug up each piece and assembled each shape, did we place our wonder upon them. But that wonder is not wrong. It is a natural response to a very large truth. Earth once had more worlds than the world we see today. There were oceans where air-breathing reptiles hunted in dark water. There were skies where creatures that were not birds opened wings broader than many modern birds. There were coastal lands where the shadow of a pterosaur drifted across the water, while below another shadow was moving through schools of fish. Land, sea, and sky were not separate from one another. Together, they created a planet where life tested the limits of size in every dimension. Even so, as on land, the gigantism of sea and sky did not last forever. These groups lived in specific ecosystems dependent on climate, sea level, food supply, breeding grounds, and the stability of the food chain. When oceans changed, when sea levels rose and fell, when prey sources shifted, when major upheavals affected the entire planet, even giant predators could become fragile. A large body always needs a wide world to support it. If that world shrinks, strength can become a burden. Imagine the end of this chapter as a sunset over ancient Earth. On the shore, the footprint of a large creature presses into wet sand. Offshore, the surface of the sea grows dark, concealing every movement beneath it. In the sky, a pterosaur glides past for the last time through red light, its long wings stretched in the wind. In that moment, the three spaces of the planet appear together: land, water, air. Each place once created its own kind of giant. Each place once pushed life toward a different limit, and each place eventually had to change. Sauropods have shown us how large bodies on land could become when bones, necks, breath, and feeding worked together. Ancient seas show us how water could lift enormous bodies into blue darkness. Ancient skies show us that even air, seemingly too thin and fragile, once carried wings of astonishing width. But one day those ecosystems would no longer remain the same. The giant dynasties of the Mesozoic gradually moved toward their ending. And after many giants vanished, Earth did not stop creating. It simply changed its method. In the next chapter, we will step into a world after the dinosaurs. A world where ecological gaps opened, where tropical forests, ice and snow grasslands, and new oceans once again created opportunities for gigantism to return. No longer the long-necked sauropod, no longer the pterosaur in the Mesozoic sky, but new names would appear. Titanoboa mammoths, the great mammals of the Ice Age, and creatures, proving that the age of monsters did not end the moment dinosaurs left the stage. It simply moved into another form. After the ancient oceans and ancient skies, after the shadow of the mosasaur beneath dark waters, and the wide wings of the pterosaur against the Mesozoic sky, Earth entered a profound moment of silence. An old world had reached its ending. The non-avian dinosaurs disappeared. Many giant marine reptiles no longer swam through the oceans. The pterosaur wings that had once spread across the sky also left the stage. But life did not close there. In the emptiness that remained, the planet began doing what it had done for hundreds of millions of years, quietly rebuilding. Imagine you are standing on a land after a great upheaval. There is no longer the heavy sound of sauropod herds walking by. There is no longer the hunting shadow of large dinosaurs across the plains. The forests may have changed. The sky feels different. Broken food chains are trying to reconnect through the creatures that survived. The ground at this moment is not immediately a paradise. It is a world opened up emptier, stranger, like a vast room after its former inhabitants have left. And in that room, smaller, more hidden, more enduring creatures begin to step out from the darkness. During the age of dinosaurs, mammals already existed, but most of them were not rulers of the land. Many were small, active, in the hidden corners of ecosystems, living in a world where the largest roles had already been occupied by dinosaurs. But when the non-avian dinosaurs disappeared, those roles no longer belonged to anyone. Plains needed new plant eaters. Forests needed creatures to browse leaves, break branches, and spread seeds. Food chains needed new predators. Oceans needed new great hunters. And across millions of years, small bodies gradually grew larger, became more diverse, more daring, until Earth once again had giants. But the giants after the dinosaurs were not like the giants that came before. They did not carry the long necks of sauropods. They did not fly with wing membranes like pterosaurs. They did not swim through ancient seas in the shape of mosasaurs or ichthyosaurs. This was a new world with new formulas. Some giants were reptiles in hot, humid tropical forests. Some were leaf-eating mammals on open lands. Some were giant sharks in the open sea. Some were ancient elephants, woolly rhinoceroses, giant ground sloths, short-faced bears, saber-toothed cats moving through the cold climate of the Ice Age. Earth did not repeat exactly what had been lost. It recreated gigantism with new materials. One of the strongest images from the time after the dinosaurs is Titanoboa. Leave the dry plains behind and step into an ancient tropical forest in the land that is now Colombia, a few million years after the non-avian dinosaurs vanished. The air here is hot and humid, heavy with the scent of water and rotting leaves. Slow rivers move through the forest. The riverbanks are soft black, tangled with roots. Insects call in the lower layers of the forest. Large turtles fish ancient crocodilians, and many freshwater creatures live in a dense ecosystem. And somewhere within the murky water, a long, heavy body, almost soundless, is sliding through the mud. Titanoboa did not need a roar to become terrifying. It was a snake, and the power of a snake lies in silence. A low head near the water's surface. A long body dragging through the mud like a muscular stream of shadow. It does not run, does not pounce, like a mammalian predator, does not flap wings, does not dive down from the sky. It waits, slithers, senses vibrations, and uses its whole body to become a living coil. Titanoboa fossils were discovered in the Cerrejón coal mine in Colombia, and this snake is often described as being longer than 12 meters, possibly more than 40 feet in common estimates. Smithsonian has described the discovery of Titanoboa as one of those findings that forced scientists to look again at the living conditions of the Paleocene tropics. What matters about Titanoboa is not only its size. What matters is the question behind that size. Why could a snake grow so large? For ectothermic animals, such as snakes, environmental temperature plays an enormous role. Their bodies depend heavily on outside warmth to maintain activity. A hotter, more humid Paleocene tropical world may have created the conditions for a snake to reach a size far beyond modern snakes. Britannica emphasizes that Titanoboa's gigantic size is thought to be closely linked to the Paleocene climate, because snakes need an environment warm enough to sustain growth and metabolism at such a scale. And so Titanoboa teaches us that after the dinosaurs, gigantism could return very early, but according to a different logic. Here it was not long necks and air-filled bones. It was not herds of giant plant eaters moving across plains. It was heat water, dense forest, slow rivers, and an ectothermic body supported by the warmth of its environment. Earth seemed to be saying that large size does not belong to one group of creatures alone. When the climate is suitable, when food is present, when the environment is wide enough and stable enough, life can once again push the body toward its limits. Then time continued to flow. The Paleocene tropical forest was not the whole story. Across tens of millions of years, mammals became more diverse. New groups appeared spread across the continents and took over roles that had once belonged to groups now gone. Some lived in trees, some dug burrows, some ran across plains, some ate meat, some ate leaves. And among them, some began to grow larger in a way very different from dinosaurs. They did not lay eggs like sauropods, but carried their young inside the body and nourished them with milk. They had relatively stable body temperatures, different ways of caring for offspring, and teeth and jaws adapted to many kinds of food. But those very traits also set limits. Large mammals often give birth to fewer young, invest more in each offspring, and must carry the young inside the mother's body. A giant mammal cannot produce many small eggs the way a sauropod could. It must nourish one or a few young with its own energy. This gives mammalian gigantism a different character. It is often tied to a slower rhythm of life, a longer time to maturity, more dependent young, and populations that are harder to recover if the environment changes too quickly. But in favorable periods, mammals can still reach very large sizes. Imagine the wide lands of ancient Asia during the Oligocene and early Miocene. There once lived Indricotherium, often grouped with Paraceratherium, a distant relative of modern rhinoceroses, but without horns. Its body was tall, its legs long, its neck reaching upward to feed on leaves from branches that many other animals could not touch. If sauropods were like living towers of the Mesozoic, then Indricotherium was another kind of tower, in the age of mammals, less elongated, not massive according to the same formula, but still large enough to make modern humans look upward. Britannica describes Indricotherium as one of the largest land mammals ever to exist, living in Asian deposits from the late Oligocene and early Miocene. But even the largest giant mammals did not follow the sauropod path. This makes the story clearer. Earth does not only ask, how large can it become? It also asks, how is this body built? A mammal can be tall, heavy, and strong, but it is still bound by mammalian reproduction, skeleton metabolism, teeth, digestive system, and the need to care for young. So, the gigantism after the dinosaurs was a different kind of gigantism with different limits. It is not less fascinating. It simply belongs to another biological chapter. Meanwhile, in the ocean, gigantism also returned in a new form. After the Mesozoic marine reptiles disappeared, the seas did not remain empty forever. Large fish sharks, whales, and many other groups gradually occupied new roles. One of the most haunting names is Megalodon, the giant shark that lived long after the age of dinosaurs. Megalodon was not a dinosaur, not a marine reptile, and it did not live alongside the long-necked sauropods. It belonged to a much later age when the ocean had changed. Marine mammals had become more diverse, and marine food chains opened new opportunities for a giant predator. Imagine a fossil tooth lying in the palm of your hand. It is large, heavy, with serrated edges like a stone blade sharpened by time. From teeth like these, scientists estimate the size of Megalodon because shark skeletons are mostly cartilage and rarely fossilize completely. Smithsonian Ocean Portal describes large megalodon individuals as possibly reaching about 60 feet in length and weighing up to around 50 tons, while also emphasizing that size estimates depend heavily on the relationship between tooth size and shark body length. Megalodon shows that after the dinosaurs, the ocean still held enough energy to nourish giant hunters. But it also reveals a familiar rule: a large predator can exist only if beneath it there is a rich enough ecosystem. A large shark needs large prey, wide seas, long travel routes, and prey populations stable enough to support it. In the ocean, large size can help a creature hunt more powerfully, travel farther, and retain heat better. But it also makes the body more dependent on greater energy sources. In this chapter, we do not need to go deeply into the disappearance of Megalodon. We only need to see that after the dinosaurs, the sea still continued to create its own giant shadows. Then Earth entered a very different world, the Ice Age. The entire planet was not buried beneath ice, but the climate was colder. Sea levels shifted, ice expanded across many regions, and cold grasslands stretched over green lands. Here, gigantism appeared in a form closer to our imagination: mammoths with long, curved tusks, mastodons in forests, woolly rhinoceroses on cold steppes, giant bison, giant ground sloths, short-faced bears, saber-toothed cats. They did not live in the world of dinosaurs. They lived far closer to us in the flow of time, close enough that ancient humans once saw some of them. Step into a Pleistocene afternoon. Cold wind blows across the grassland. On the ground are low grasses, shrubs, and meltwater forming shallow streaks. Far away, a herd of mammoths moves slowly. Their thick fur stirs in the wind. Their curved tusks extend forward like ivory crescent moons. A calf walks between the adults, shielded from wind and danger by larger bodies. This is a very different kind of giant from the sauropod. It is not the gigantism of tropical forests or ancient swamps. It is the gigantism of cold, of grassland, of long-distance movement, of retaining heat and searching for food in a harsh seasonal world. Large size in cold climates can be advantageous because a large body loses heat more slowly than a small one. A mammoth with its large body fat layer, thick fur, and other adaptations could endure cold environments far better than many smaller creatures unsuited to them. But it still had to eat continuously. The cold grasslands had to be broad enough. Plants had to be abundant enough. Snow could not cover food too long everywhere. Herds had to move to find resources, and calves had to survive through their first seasons of life. The National Park Service describes Ice Age Beringia as having many iconic megafauna, including woolly mammoths, mastodons, woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions, and short-faced bears. In other regions of the world, gigantism took its own forms. South America once had giant ground sloths, plant-eating creatures that could stand on their hind legs to reach branches. Australia once had Diprotodon, a giant relative of the wombat, along with many other unique megafauna. The continents were like separate laboratories, each creating its own collection of giants, depending on climate, vegetation, predators, and evolutionary history. The Australian Museum describes Pleistocene megafauna as large animals that once roamed Earth, with different examples in Australia, Europe, North America, and Africa. This is remarkable. After the dinosaurs, gigantism did not return in only one place. It returned many times in many different environments. In the hot tropics, there was Titanoboa. In ancient Asian lands, there were giant leaf-eating mammals, such as Indricotherium. In the open sea, there was Megalodon. On frozen grasslands, there were mammoths and Pleistocene megafauna. Each example reminds us that large size was not a rare phenomenon belonging only to the dinosaur age. It is a possibility always present within life, waiting for the right conditions to appear again. But if we look closely, we see that the giants after the dinosaurs were often fragile in their own ways. Titanoboa needed a world hot and humid enough. Indricotherium needed suitable plants and habitats. Megalodon needed seas rich in large prey. Mammoths needed cold landscapes and wide grasslands. Giant ground sloths, mastodons, woolly rhinoceroses, short-faced bears, all were tied to specific ecosystems. A large body cannot live on the memory of a lost world. It needs that world to truly continue around it. So, this chapter does not only tell us that giants returned, it tells us that Earth created the conditions for their return many times. After a great extinction, empty spaces opened. After climate changes, new environments formed. After the spread of forests, grasslands, rivers, or food-rich oceans, large bodies had opportunities again. But those opportunities always had limits. No dynasty is eternal. No size is immune to change. And the larger a creature becomes, the more it needs the world around it to maintain a certain balance. Imagine the end of this chapter as a slow parade across many ages. First, Titanoboa slides along a tropical riverbank, its body half submerged in murky water. Then a hornless giant leaf-eater walks through open woodlands of ancient Asia, its neck reaching upward in the sun. Out at sea, a megalodon tooth falls to the ocean floor after a hunt resting in sediment for millions of years. Farther north, a herd of mammoths walks through cold wind, leaving deep footprints in the soft ground of the Ice Age. These images do not belong to the same place, the same time, or the same group of creatures. But they all answer one question: why did giants return? Because Earth continued to create worlds that could nourish them. And as we stand in the middle of that parade, we realize that gigantism was not a single age. It was a repeating motif in the history of life. Each time the environment opened wide enough, each time energy was abundant enough, each time evolution found a suitable body, life tried to step into large size again. But behind that grandeur, there was always a gentle shadow. If the world changed, if the climate shifted, if food diminished, if a new pressure appeared, those large bodies would be among the first to feel the cost. After all the worlds we have passed through, after the swamp forests of the Carboniferous, after the strange creatures before the age of dinosaurs, after the long-necked sauropods walking across ancient plains, after sea monsters, enormous wings, Titanoboa, Megalodon, and mammoths, the final question begins to appear in a quieter kind of light. If Earth created giants many times, then why did so many of them disappear? Why did bodies once so powerful, they seemed to have almost no rivals, finally become nothing more than bones, teeth, footprints, and fragments of fossil? resting silently in stone. The answer does not lie in a single catastrophe, just as gigantism does not have one single cause. The disappearance of giants does not have one simple formula for every age. Some groups vanished because of a global shock. Some declined because the climate changed. Some disappeared when their habitats shrank. Some came under pressure from human beings. Some depended too heavily on one food source, one kind of climate, one sea, one grassland, one forest. And when the world around them changed, the very size that had once been their strength began to become their weakness. Think again of a gigantic body. When conditions are favorable, large size is a gift. It helps mature creatures face fewer predators. It helps them retain heat better in cold climates. It helps them travel farther across open lands. It helps them feed higher, hunt larger prey, dive deeper, or store energy for longer. But a large body is also like a great fire. It needs a tremendous amount of fuel. It needs space. It needs time to mature. It often reproduces more slowly or requires greater investment in the next generation. It cannot easily hide. It cannot quickly change its way of life when its familiar food source disappears. And the history of Earth is the history of change. No forest lasts forever. No sea remains the same forever. No climate stands still across millions of years. Continents drift. Mountains rise and wear away. Oceans open and close. Sea levels rise and fall. Temperatures climb, drop, and fluctuate. New species appear. New predators enter ecosystems, and new diseases and forms of competition change the game. Within that flow, small, flexible, fast-breeding creatures can sometimes bend with the world. But giants often need the world to bend around them. One of the most famous moments of disappearance came at the end of the Cretaceous, about 66 million years ago. At that time, a large asteroid struck the region that is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, creating the Chicxulub crater. That impact was not merely a local explosion. It pushed dust gases and material into the atmosphere, changing light temperature and food chains on a global scale. The Natural History Museum describes the Chicxulub asteroid as the final blow in a world that had already been undergoing environmental changes. And in that extinction event, the non-avian dinosaurs, along with many other groups of organisms, disappeared. Imagine the sky after that impact. Not a blue sky returning after rain, but a sky covered in dust and darkness. The light weakened. Plants struggled. Plankton in the sea declined. The first links of the food chain were damaged, and when the foundation shook, the layers above began to collapse. Large herbivores needed plants. Large predators needed large prey. When plants' prey habitats and seasonal rhythms changed too quickly, giant bodies could no longer adapt in time. In that moment, large size could not save the beings that had once ruled. A small animal might eat seeds, carrion, or shelter underground, surviving the difficult period by using less energy. But a large creature needed a great deal every day. It could not hibernate through years of chaos if its body lacked that ability. It could not reduce its demands to the level of a small animal. It could not produce many rapid generations to evolve with the new environment. And so, in a world suddenly colder, darker, and poorer in food, greatness became a burden. But not every giant disappeared in a single moment from the sky. Many stories ended more slowly, more quietly, and much closer to us. Step forward to the end of the Ice Age, when mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, woolly rhinoceroses short-faced bears, saber-toothed cats, and many other megafauna still moved across the continents. This was no longer a world so distant that human beings did not exist. In many places, ancient humans lived alongside those great creatures. They saw them, tracked them, hunted them, painted them, feared them, and perhaps also revered them. The end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the Holocene formed a major period of transition. Ice retreated, the climate warmed, rainfall changed, vegetation changed, grasslands shrank in some places, forests spread in others, and the habitats of many species became fragmented. The Natural History Museum states that hundreds of large mammal species disappeared during the transition from the last ice age to the present interglacial period, roughly between 50,000 and 5,000 years ago, and the causes studied include climate change, shifts in vegetation, and hunting by humans. Imagine a herd of mammoths crossing a cold grassland near the end of a long season. The wind is no longer the same as before. Snow melts earlier in some places, but the familiar food no longer spreads as widely as it once did. Nutrient-rich grasslands are gradually replaced by other kinds of vegetation. Ancient migration routes are cut apart by forests, swamps, new streams, or stretches of land that no longer provide enough food. An adult mammoth is still powerful. It still has tusks, a massive body, and the protection of the herd. But that strength cannot make grass grow again where the climate has changed. It cannot bring winter back to what it was. It cannot expand a grassland that is shrinking. Then there is humanity. This part must be told carefully, not turned into an overly simple story in which human beings alone killed every large species everywhere, but also not ignoring the very real role humans played in many regions. Scientists still debate the degree to which climate and human activity contributed on different continents for different species and at different times. But a growing body of research shows that human pressure, especially hunting and environmental change, was a very important part of many late Quaternary megafaunal extinctions. A 2024 review in PNAS emphasized that over the past 50,000 years, land vertebrate faunas have lost many large species, and that decline is closely tied to human impacts along with environmental factors. For a large species, even a small but sustained pressure can become serious. If a species reproduces slowly, every young animal is precious. If a few more adults are hunted, if fewer young survive, if the dry season lasts a little longer, if the grasslands shrink a little more, the population may begin to decline. At first, that decline may be difficult to see. A herd still passes through the valley. A footprint still presses into the mud. A call still carries through the cold wind. But across many generations, the spaces between herds grow wider. There are fewer young. Habitats become separated. And one day, where there were once many footprints, only wind moves through the grass. That is the slow tragedy of gigantism. There does not always need to be a dramatic scene of collapse. Many species can disappear by becoming less visible with each generation until there are no longer enough individuals to return. Large size makes them harder to change. A small animal may shift to another food source more quickly. A small species may produce many litters, create more variation, and try more ways of living, but a giant is often tied to a long rhythm of life. If the rhythm of the planet changes faster than its own rhythm, it begins to be left behind. Megalodon can also be understood in that light. It was a gigantic marine predator, powerful and formidable, but it needed an ocean rich enough in large prey. When ocean climate, sea levels, coastal breeding areas, and whale communities changed, a giant predator could face trouble. We do not need to turn the extinction of Megalodon into one simple story. The important thing is to understand the principle in the sea, as on land, large bodies always depend on a great network of energy. If that network changes shape, breaks apart, or moves elsewhere, the one standing at the top may fall the hardest. From here, we begin to see a paradox. Large size helps living beings overcome many ordinary dangers. A giant adult may be attacked by predators less often. It may cross greater distances. It may endure cold better. It may expand its feeding range. But large size does not help much against changes at the planetary level. It cannot stop an asteroid. It cannot hold the climate in place. It cannot preserve the grasslands. It cannot make the seas rich in prey again. It cannot suddenly increase reproductive speed when a population is already declining. In great crises, the strength of an individual can become very small before the power of the environment. And perhaps this is what gives giant skeletons in museums such a quiet sadness. They do not only tell us that a creature was once enormous, they tell us that the world was once wide enough for it. A mammoth tusk is not merely a tusk. It is the memory of cold grasslands, of herds of seasonal migrations of calves walking between the bodies of their mothers and other adults. A megalodon tooth is not merely a tooth. It is the memory of a life-rich ocean where ancient whales and large prey once nourished a giant hunter. A sauropod vertebra is not merely bone. It is the memory of an ecosystem with enough trees, enough time, and enough space for a body of tens of tons to rise and walk. When giants vanish, they do not take only their bodies out of the world, they leave gaps behind. The disappearance of a large herbivore can change how plants grow, how seeds spread, how grasslands are maintained, and how predators find food. The disappearance of a large predator can change the behavior of prey and the structure of the food chain. Extinction, then, is not a quiet period at the end of a species' name. It is a change in how an entire landscape functions. When a giant leaves the world around, it becomes a different world as well. But the story should not end only with loss. There is a truth both strange and beautiful. The largest creature ever known does not belong only to the past. It is still alive in the ocean today. The blue whale, with a length that can reach more than 30 meters and an immense body mass, is described by AMNH as the largest animal ever known to have existed, larger even than the giant dinosaurs of the past. NOAA Fisheries also notes that blue whales can reach up to 110 feet in length and weigh up to 330,000 pounds. That changes the feeling of the entire journey. We do not live only after the age of giants. We are still living alongside a giant. Out there in distant seas, a gray-blue body, as long as a ship is still gliding through dark water. It has no teeth like Megalodon, no long neck like a sauropod, no wings like a pterosaur. It feeds on tiny creatures called krill, filtering seawater through baleen plates, turning countless nearly invisible organisms into energy for the largest body life has ever created. This is another kind of gigantism, not the power of predation through great jaws, but the power of filtering migration and rhythmic harmony with the ocean. And the blue whale also reminds us that gigantism remains fragile. It needs healthy oceans. It needs a stable food supply. It needs safe migration routes. It needs to be free from harm caused by ship strikes, noise fishing gear, and changes in the sea. The giants of the past disappeared because the world changed in ways they could not overcome. The giants still alive today also depend on the world we share with them. Natural history, therefore, is not only a story of what is past, it is a gentle but profound reminder of the present. Looking back over the whole journey, we see that Earth once created giant creatures, not because of a single miracle. The Carboniferous shows that atmosphere and swamps could expand the limits for insects and arthropods. The world before dinosaurs shows that food, climate, and evolution continually experimented with large body plans. Sauropods show that a special body formula could bring land animals to almost unimaginable size. The sea shows that buoyancy and food chains could sustain enormous shadows. The sky shows that even air could once carry vast wings if the body was light enough, strong enough, and refined enough. And the world after the dinosaurs shows that gigantism could return again and again in many different forms. But this final chapter tells us what remains. No size is eternal. Large size is a contract with the environment. When the environment keeps its promise, the giant may rule. When the environment changes, the terms that magnificent body can become a burden. A large creature needs more moves, more slowly, and depends more deeply. And on a planet that is always in motion, depending too much on one particular world can be dangerous. Imagine the final scene of the story. You return to the silent museum from the beginning, but now the skeletons no longer feel like strange shapes. You have passed through their worlds. You have seen swamp forests, ancient plains, blue dark seas, the Mesozoic sky, Paleocene, tropical forests, and frozen Pleistocene steppes. You understand that every bone is a piece of the planet, every footprint, a moment when climate, food, body, and time came together. Giants are not only large creatures, they are proof that Earth has had many different versions of itself. And as the museum lights slowly fade, the original question changes as well. At first we asked, why did Earth once have giant creatures? Now the answer becomes broader, because life always tries to reach its limits when the planet allows it. It grew large in oxygen, in water, in forests, in cold, in deep seas, and in the empty spaces after extinction. But when the limits of the planet change, life must change with them. Creatures that cannot change become fossils. Creatures that still fit continue walking into tomorrow. Perhaps that is what makes this story both majestic and peaceful. The giants have vanished, but they have not vanished completely. They remain in stone in museums, in research, in imagination, in the feeling of smallness we have whenever we stand before a skeleton larger than any familiar room. They remind us that Earth is not a static world. It is a long, slow story, opening and closing many times. And we, the ones who arrived very late, are only listening to a few surviving pages of that enormous book. And here our journey tonight through the age of giant creatures slowly comes to a close. From the dark, damp coal forests of more than 300 million years ago, where oxygen and swamps once nourished strange giant insects, we have passed through worlds unimaginably distant. We have seen Earth experimenting with its first forms of life on land, then stepping into the age of dinosaurs, where long-necked sauropods rose like living towers across prehistoric plains. We have descended into ancient seas, where enormous marine reptiles glided through dark blue waters, then lifted our eyes toward the sky, to see vast wings opening above a planet that had never known a human shadow. But perhaps what remains with us the longest is not only their size, not the great tooth, the long skeleton, or the footprint pressed deep into stone. What remains is the realization that those giant creatures did not appear by magic. They were shaped by the conditions of Earth itself: air, climate, food, oceans, time, evolution, and the fragile limits that life must always face. When the world was stable enough, great size could be a strength. But when the climate changed, when habitats shrank, when food disappeared, that very gigantism became a burden. The giants that once ruled the planet eventually had to leave the stage, leaving behind silent skeletons and a feeling of smallness before the deep history of Earth. If tonight's story has brought you peace, curiosity, or simply the desire to keep traveling through ancient worlds like these, follow the fan page so you won't miss the next journeys. And let me know, what story would you like to hear next night? Sea dinosaurs, the Ice Age ancient human species, or another mystery from prehistoric Earth?